Hello everyone, and welcome to this presentation on Franklin's National Historic Districts. I am Vicki Earls, Head of Reference Services at the Franklin Library, and I also manage the archive for the library. I love Franklin history and especially Franklin Library history, so I'm presenting the districts in reverse chronological order, mostly because I know a little of the background on the Dean College district, so I can get into a little bit more detail. But first, a little background information on the National Register of Historic Places. A strong post-war economy brought about construction of new roads and highways, and more widely available mortgage loans created a housing boom. The downside of this rapid growth was the demolition of anything old that was in the path of progress. Historians and preservationists began to lobby and finally got the attention of the Johnson administration. The National Register of Historic Places was created through the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, signed into law by President Johnson on October 15, 1966. In the early days of the Act, historic preservation was focused on sites of national importance, for example, the Washington Monument, but with the creation of the Register, sites of local significance could also be included. At the top, I have a nice quote from LBJ. The historical and cultural foundations of the nation should be preserved as a living part of our community life and development. Now let's take a look at National Historic Districts. What is a National Historic District? A National Historic District is really a living slice of American history, but not a living history museum. These districts preserve the look and feel of a significant time in American history, represented through architecture and unchanged landscapes, without freezing it in time like Old Sturbridge Village. I should mention that the National Register is administered by the National Park Service and locally managed by the Massachusetts Historical Commission. On this slide here are a few examples of district signage in the area. Franklin does have a really nice marker on the common profiling some of our historic buildings. Beyond just honoring the past through preservation, what are the advantages? National Register properties that are owned by municipalities or nonprofits are eligible to compete for grants from the Massachusetts Preservation Projects Fund, or the MPPF, a state-funded matching grant program that supports the preservation and maintenance of properties and sites listed on the register. It also offers tax breaks for commercial use properties listed on the register. This is a picture of the Haywood Mansion, which I believe is now a commercial building, so it may qualify for the investment tax credit at some point if it needed to do some preservation on that building. One of Franklin's historic districts was created because of the Massachusetts Preservation Project Fund, which we'll see a bit later. There is also the ability to create local districts. National districts identify important historic neighborhoods, but local districts are much more effective at preventing inappropriate changes. By establishing local districts, the community has some control over changes made to the existing structures in the districts through the creation of a bylaw. How restrictive the guidelines are is up to each community, and it really only applies to the external look of the homes or sites. Architectural heritage is extremely vulnerable to inappropriate alterations without local regulation. Franklin does not currently have any local districts. So, where can you find more information on historic homes and districts in Massachusetts? The MACRIS database, mhc-macris.net. The Mass Cultural Resource Information System database is not just for places listed on the National Register. It's basically an inventory of all local assets of historic importance determined by the Mass Historical Commission from documents filed by the city or town's historical commission or society. The majority of the documentation filed for Franklin's entries were meticulously researched and documented by the Franklin Historical Commission. There are over 400 entries for Franklin in the database. Another way to access MACRIS is through the library's website. Select Local History and Genealogy on the left of the page and scroll down a ways to find the link to MACRIS. There are a lot of great local history links on this page, and I update it regularly as online access to information continues to grow. Now let's take a look at Franklin's historic districts. So first up, Franklin Common Historic District, created in 2005. As it says in the National Register Significance Statement, quote, "The Common is the oldest public space in town, and the finest houses in the vicinity were built and occupied by Franklin's leading citizens," End quote. These are some of the buildings listed as part of the historic district. To be included, the structures would have to be mostly unchanged from the original design and be more than 50 years old. There are about 80 sites listed for this district, too many to picture here. So here are just a few familiar buildings and monuments in the district. Up in the left corner, 39 Union Street is the oldest house in the district, built about 1780, possibly moved to Union Street from another location in town, and at one point was owned by Davis Thayer. Many of the houses on Union Street were owned by Davis Thayer. His straw factory was on the site of the Davis Thayer School. I thought I would do a quick spotlight on one house in the district. It's not the most glamorous or stately, but one of my personal favorites. 3 Union Street has been a multifamily home since the late 19th century, but it began its life as the Franklin Academy. Built as a private high school in 1836, it was established by Mortimer Blake, author of A History of the Town of Franklin. In his book, Blake reports that the building was, quote, erected by a stock company with accommodations for 100 pupils, recitation rooms, a large hall for public examinations, apparatus, etc., end quote. He also notes that it had a cupola and a bell, as well as front pillars, which were all gone by 1879 when Blake's book was published. Prior to 1868, there was no public high school level of education available in Franklin, and anyone who wanted to attend high school had to pay for a private academy. Horace Mann attended the Williams Academy in Wrentham. After the Franklin Academy closed, it became a general store, then a multifamily home. My personal affection for this house is because of the super cute baby on this slide. My mom, Judy Bushanio, born Judy Carlson, was a home birth, and on February 16, 1942, she was born in the apartment just to the left of the front door of this very house. That same apartment was my sister's first apartment and my best friend's first apartment. If you grew up in Franklin, you know someone that's lived in that house. It's really a local treasure. This district began at the Franklin Common, and it ends with this historic building. The final building in the Franklin Common Historic District is the Brick School, also known historically as the Meeting House School. It's listed as part of the Franklin Common Historic District and as an individual property on the National Register of Historic Places. It was also documented in 1941 as part of the Historic American Building Survey, which predates the Preservation Act by 33 years. At the top right is my oh-so-historic first grade class of 1972. Now on to our next district, which is actually our first and my personal favorite. So now on to Dean Junior College Historic District, established in 1975. For some people that might not know, Dean College began its life as Dean Academy and was for a time Dean Junior College before it became Dean College proper. So I'll start with the significance statement from the National Register. Quote, the Dean Junior College Historic District is a virtually intact Victorian residential and educational area set in the middle of a 20th century suburban community. Each of the buildings is an outstanding example of high Victorian architecture. Many of the buildings are significant because of their relationship to the Ray family, Franklin's most important philanthropists. End quote. So I've always wondered why, if this historic district was just about, well, creating an historic district, why stop at the funeral home? Why not keep going? The Town Common District, created 30-ish years later, directly connects to this district. So in 1975, they could have kept on filing for all of the buildings, but they were in a hurry because it was really all about the library. Quick explanation of the workings of the library in 1975. From 1904 to 1982, the library was privately funded and managed by 2 associations. Ray Memorial Association, established to manage the funds given by the Ray sisters, about $50,000, for the upkeep of the Ray Memorial Building, including the art, as well as a caretaker's house, not really any additional source of funding. And the Franklin Library Association paid for everything else, staff, books, office supplies, etc., and were the legal custodians of the Benjamin Franklin book donation. They were established by wealthy local industrialists and the recipient of many bequests, including from the estate of Oliver Dean. The 2 associations could not legally share funds. At the top is a quote following an art condition evaluation, quote, in regards to the murals and paintings, they have been shamefully neglected and are pulling away from the walls and deteriorating in the library, grime embedded and moisture damaged. Even with performing only the most necessary of repairs, by 1975 the Ray Memorial Fund was running dangerously low, and 70 years of wear and tear made the library building highly susceptible to moisture damage, especially to the valuable and irreplaceable paintings. But one member of the Ray Memorial Association had an idea as to how the paintings could be saved. So the reading of the minutes from a special meeting of the Ray Memorial Association, February 4th, 1975. Mr. Crockford presented information on the possibility of having the Ray Memorial Library approved as a historical site, and as such would become eligible for matching funds for repairs to the building. He stated that the building would be part of a so-called block, which would also include some of the buildings belonging to Dean Junior College, as well as the Jackson Funeral Home. In view of the fact that a grant has to be filed by March 14, 1975, it was voted to proceed at once with the filing. An estimate of $12,000 for repairs and restoration of the murals and fresco paintings was presented and was judged to be an immediate necessity in view of the deterioration over the years. So Richard Crockford, who was also the president of Dean College, so this may be a clue as to why it's called the Dean Junior College District and not the Ray Memorial Library District. But truly, Dean College and the library had always been sort of siblings in the Ray family, as well as neighbors. So librarians on Dean committees and Dean College leaders on library committees was pretty common. The district was kept pretty small because time was of the essence. This meeting took place on February 4th, and the documentation had to be filed with the Mass Historical Commission by March 14th. No time to lose because the paintings were literally falling off the walls, and who knows what could happen if they waited another year to apply for the MPPF grant. This slide and the next are the buildings included in the district. The Trowbridge House was originally located across the street from the funeral home where there is now library parking. The Pierce House was lost to fire 20-ish years ago. The Ray and Pierce House were originally twin homes, but Lydia Ray was really taken by Italianate design and built sort of a shell house over the original house, kind of like when you slipcover an old sofa. Kind of. I believe that the house within a house created a lot of pockets where fire could hide and made the house just impossible to save. When I inserted these photos, it struck me how lovely these buildings are. When you see something every day, even if it's beautiful, it's easy to take it for granted. So rather than doing a building spotlight, I thought I would tell a Dean Academy story. It's one of my favorite Franklin stories, a tragic love story worthy of Emily Bronte. Stand aside, Wuthering Heights. This story may be familiar to some, so feel free to check your phone or something. I don't mind, it's okay. So our story takes place in the very early 19th century. And here are some of our people involved in the story. We have Dr. Oliver Dean, who of course founded Dean Academy, Deliverance Emmons, who I don't have an image of, so she is currently portrayed by Emily Bronte. We have Massachusetts author Hannah Adams, and starring in the center we have Reverend Nathaniel Emmons, Congregational Minister of Franklin. It's important to note that Nathaniel Emmons was Franklin's congregational minister at a time when just about everyone in town was Congregationalist, so he was very influential, not just in Franklin, but in New England. Famous, really, in his own time. He even appears as a character in a Harriet Beecher Stowe novel. He was also a fire and brimstone, sinners in the hands of an angry God, last of the Puritans, Calvinist. Nobody was good enough to end up in heaven, not even himself. So basically, he is the person that you see portrayed in his portrait. Now on to our story. While Oliver Dean was studying to be a doctor, he was also courting Reverend Emmons' daughter Deliverance, called Delia by friends and family. At that time, Oliver was living in a rooming house, and also in residence at this house was Massachusetts author Hannah Adams. While chatting with Oliver, she discovered he was seeing Deliverance Emmons. Hannah was friends with Reverend Emmons, and while visiting with the Emmons family, she asked the Reverend what he thought about Oliver Dean courting his daughter. His emphatic response was, "I don't like it at all." What? My Delia, the brightest and most talented of my flock, the one who of all my children inherits the most of her father's traits, marry Seth Dean's son? I tell you, I don't like it at all. So, Troublemaker Adams repeated this whole conversation to Dean, who was so embarrassed and heartbroken that he stopped all contact with Delia, but never told her why. He just didn't return her letters. but he kept every letter for 60 years. When he lost his vision and could no longer read them, he destroyed them so no one else could read them. Delia died of consumption 2 years after Dean married. She had a lot of suitors, but she herself never married. Before her death, she told one of her caregivers, "When you next see Dr. Dean, you tell him that I loved him on earth and I hope to meet him in heaven." Oliver Dean was very fond of the woman he eventually married, but had these final words on Delia. "Her name was Deliverance, but I always called her Delia. Delia Emmons was the one woman in the world for me, and life would have been to me a widely different thing if I had married her. I ought to have married Delia Emmons." After the death of Reverend Emmons, Delia's sister contacted Dean to tell him that the family was selling the Emmons farm and that he should have the first opportunity to buy it because that's what Delia would have wanted. He did buy that land, and on that land was where he built Dean Academy. The Dean Junior College Historic District was accepted into the National Register of Historic Places, and the required matching funds were raised, the largest amount of $3,000 given by the town of Franklin, and the paintings were restored. First, I'd like to thank Jane Austen for helping me out by holding up a copy of James Johnston's book, Images of America, Franklin. So, pride and promotion. The Franklin community should definitely be proud of our place in the National Register, and I think it's worthy of promotion. Promotion of our local history can actually encourage heritage tourism, which can create jobs and business opportunities. So, just something to consider. One small way to promote local historic places is with plaques or markers. I love historic markers, so all of these pics were taken by me. There's the marker for the origin of the Rhode Island Red, the Williams Academy in Rentham, where Horace Mann attended high school, the home of Johnny Appleseed in Leominster, which is the weirdest one because it's on somebody's front lawn, the John Brown Bell in Marlborough, and a more woodsy marker for Anawan Rock in Rehoboth. So that's all for me. Hopefully I was able to provide some fun Franklin history and some helpful info on Franklin's National Historic Districts. And thank you from me and from some of the happier figures from the library's mural for listening to my presentation. Have a great evening.